In choosing this topic, it occurred to me that it would be an appropriate topic for me, that is where we are in the war on terror and how we got here, not only because it's a subject that's I've been involved with on and off for about 18 years, or since a prosecution that eventually came to be known as United States versus Omar Abdul Rahman et al. Landed on my desk, but also because we've just celebrated, if that's the word, quietly, and that definitely is the word, what was to have been the one-year anniversary of the closing of the facility at Guantanamo Bay. Now, as you all know, Guantanamo Bay is still open, and so I thought I would deal with that topic and how it came to remain open, and also about where we are in the war on Islamist terror, which this entails a discussion of not only why that facility is still open, but also of how we got here and perhaps where we're likely to go. I'm going to do some historical review, both to help find answers to those questions and also so that you can understand why the answers are somewhat less than definite and a good deal less than satisfactory. Based on the evidence that I saw, the first encounter of this country with Islamist terrorism didn't start on September 11, 2001, or indeed on February 26, 1993, which was the date of what was then known as the World Trade Center bombing and later became known as the first World Trade Center bombing. It began in the late 1980s, and specifically at a shooting range out in Calverton, Long Island, when a group of FBI agents approached what they thought was a bunch of folks who were taking rather aggressive target practice, and thought that they would give them a toss, as they say in the business, and get their identification and so on. And these folks put them off and challenged them and said that they were engaged in what is now known as profiling, and the agents, being polite and politically correct, backed off. Forward to 1990. In October of 1990, a right-wing Israeli politician named Meir Kahane was assassinated at a ballroom here in Manhattan after giving a speech. The assailant was quickly caught, a man named El Sayed Nosair. It was immediately pronounced to be the lone act of a lone actor. The case wound up being so overtried that, notwithstanding that he had committed the crime in front of an audience that is about as large as this, he was actually acquitted of murder, but was convicted of using the gun with which he had committed the murder and was sentenced to 7 1/3 to 22 years in jail. What we now refer to as jihadi literature was seized from his apartment that discussed, among other things, toppling tall buildings in order to bring down Western civilization, but nobody paid any attention to that. It was put in a warehouse. It went largely unexamined. Well, it wasn't an isolated act by an isolated actor. In February 2003, what has become known since, as I said, as the first World Trade Center bombing occurred, killing 6 people, injuring hundreds others, causing millions of dollars in property damage. And among the demands of those who carried out that bombing was that Nosair be released from jail. When amateur video of Kahane's speech was reviewed, it was discovered that one of the people involved in the 1993 bombing was actually present in the ballroom that night. And in fact, Nosair was supposed to have made his escape by getting into a cab that was driven by another of the 1993 plotters, but he jumped into the wrong cab and therefore was captured. It turned out also that both of those people, and Nosair and others, had been present on that day at Calverton, Long Island, when the FBI agents challenged them for taking aggressive target practice. The response to the 1993 bombing was, of course, the conventional response: bring the perpetrators to justice. And they were. The 1993 bombers were convicted at a separate trial. Their spiritual leader, Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, known as the Blind Sheikh, and 9 or so others, including Nosair, were convicted of an overarching plot that included the Kahane murder, the 1993 Trade Center bombing, and a plot to blow up landmarks around New York. I should tell you that one of the other goals of that conspiracy was to assassinate Anwar Sadat when he visited. Was to assassinate Hosni Mubarak when he visited New York. Shades of today's headlines. Abdul Rahman even at that time, had an impressive background. He was not only the spiritual advisor behind the 1993 bombing, he had been the spiritual advisor to the assassins of Anwar Sadat in 1981, and he was later from jail to issue the fatwa that provided Osama bin Laden with a theological justification for 9/11. Here I should add that given what is going on today in Egypt, the Western world is, I think, quite fortunate that Abdul Rahman is in jail, because he is the sort of charismatic figure who actually could have been, and in fact aspired to be, an Egyptian Khomeini, complete with recorded sermons being distributed to his followers. The possibility of a bad outcome today would be a lot more substantial if he were on the street. Although the 1993 bombing led to I think, the debut of the phrase wake-up call, in fact, there was virtually no public focus at the time on what it is we were, in fact, dealing with and up against. I said a few moments ago that from what I had seen, this country's first encounter with Islamism occurred in the late 1980s out in Calverton, but that was not Islamism's first encounter with this country. That actually goes back to the late 1940s, when a man named Syed Kutub, who had been something of a hellraiser in Egypt, won a traveling fellowship, largely to get him out of the country. And he chose to travel to the United States. Specifically, he went to Greeley, Colorado. Now, it would be hard to think of a more placid place than Greeley, Colorado in the late 1940s. But Kutub was absolutely mortified by what he saw. The haircuts, the enthusiasm for sports, the political system, the mingling of the sexes in church outraged him. And he went back to Egypt, quit the civil service, and joined up with an organization that was already in existence, having been founded in the 1920s, called the Muslim Brotherhood. Been founded by a man named Hassan al-Banna, who was assassinated the year that Kutub left for the United States. Although the Muslim Brotherhood welcomed Nasser's coup in 1952 against the monarchy, believing that that would end corruption and bring about an Islamist state, they again were disappointed when Nasser didn't even ban the consumption of alcohol. Kutub continued his agitation, was in and out of jail, was eventually hanged in 1966, and became something of a contemporary saint. Many members of the Brotherhood fled to Saudi Arabia, where they found refuge and ideological sustenance. Kutub's brother was among those who fled and taught the doctrine in Saudi Arabia, and among his students was a man named Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian who is now number 2 in Al-Qaeda, and the pampered child of one of the richest construction families in Saudi Arabia, Osama bin Laden. Forward to 1996, reiterated in 1998, was bin Laden's declaration of war on the United States, which I think was treated here pretty much as quaint. Imagine some fellow in a cave in Afghanistan declaring war on the United States. And then came the bombing of the East Africa embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, and the response was another bring them to justice series of calls, and actually an indictment that named bin Laden as a co-defendant. Regrettably, bin Laden doesn't seem to have been impressed, or at least if he was impressed, he wasn't deterred, because in 2000, we had the bombing of the USS Cole that had actually been preceded by an attempt to bomb another U.S. destroyer called the Sullivans that failed only because the barge that they were carrying the explosives on sank. Throughout this period, we heard about terrorism, but not about what the people who were practicing the terrorism think. And unless you attended one or another of the trials involved, there was no suggestion that we should do anything other than round up the perpetrators after the fact and bring them to justice. And notwithstanding bin Laden's declarations, plural, of war, his detailed description of his grounds.